record on this computer. So for those who are joining us after the fact, welcome. Our topic this evening is a deeper dive into our Torah portion. And we know that we have two Torah portions. We have Bahar and we have Bechukotai, and we understand the calendar and how it drives the fact that sometimes we need to double up. We had talked a lot about Parshat Bahar that deals with the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year and how that addresses both the needs of the land and the need for the land to have a time of recovery and replenishment, and also the redistribution of wealth that this structure is trying to address, so that the land doesn't all accumulate in a few hands and people have the opportunity every 50 years for kind of a reset and get back to the original allocations of the land. We talked about in chapter 25, verse 15, the prohibition of hurting another person and how that is expanded to mean not hurting another person with words, and also specifically not hurting people in a business environment. And I sent you a large document that we're not going to have time to go into together, but I hope you'll take a look at individually, that dealt with all kinds of aspects of business ethics. Oh, my husband just adjusted the lights. He's in the other room on his phone playing with it. We have this app on the phone called Lightbo, and it controls every single light bulb in the house. It controls the color, what color it is, and the density of the color. And it's
very cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But it's funny to just be sitting here and he's playing with that. So anyway, I wanted to specifically reinforce the shopkeeper law that is part of this, not to wrong one another, and this idea that you don't ask the price of something if you have zero intention of buying it from that person. You know, I think it's fascinating that this law was promulgated 2,000 years ago, and way before the internet. And what we experience now is that brick and mortar stores are going out of business because people go there and use them to comparison shop and figure out exactly what they want to buy. And then they go home and order it from Amazon, which I'm not opposed to supporting Amazon, but there's a human sensitivity that you know, salespeople, their goal is to sell. So if you take up their time and get their hopes up that there might be a sale coming out of this conversation, if there's a chance that you might buy, comparison shop to your heart's content. But, you know, don't go into the store so that you can look at, you know, 12 cameras and what are all the features on these cameras, and, you know, how do they work and what do they cost, so that you can then go buy it online and save 25 bucks and have, you know, taken up the poor salesperson's time. So if you look at in the back of the book of Bahar on page 24, there are all kinds of information there about tzedakah and what are our priorities for tzedakah. The fact that tzedakah is not charity. We often translate it as charity, but tzedakah comes from the root tzedek, which is justice. It's a mitzvah to give tzedakah. It's not contingent on how we feel. Charity comes from the Greek karitas, heart, based on our feeling. Tzedakah, we are commanded to give tzedakah. It's nice if the feeling comes along with it. But even if we don't feel it, we have to still give. And then I wanted to especially focus, if you look on page 26, make sure that we are aware of Maimonides' 8 levels of tzedakah. So does everybody see that on page 26? And is this something that you've seen before? You familiar?
We went over it last time.
Okay, good. So the lowest level, giving in a grudging and unfriendly way, the highest level, to help someone to become independent. Great. So thank you for that, Chi. So that means we are free to move on to Bechukotai, the second part of our Torah portion, which begins in verse 3. Attempting to make a connection that most of us would reject between human behavior and meteorology, that if we, a chok is a law. A chok is one of the words for a law. So im bechukotai telechu. The parsha is called chukotai, my laws. And im is if, it's contingent. If you follow my laws, then this is what's going to happen. You'll have abundance. Your threshing will overtake your vintage. You'll eat your fill of bread. There'll be peace in the land, respite from vicious beasts. Your armies will be successful. Everything is gonna work great if you follow the law, and if not, much of this parsha has to do with the consequences of not following the law. And the challenge is for us as contemporary Jews is, I don't think most of us think that our good fortune is, and the success of our economic success is contingent on our following halakha. I mean, we observe that. And this is the biggest question that all religions have to contend with, is we see wonderful, good, decent, caring, kind people who suffer. And we see mamzerim, that is, it's a Hebrew word for bastard. Mamzer is a bastard. I'll talk about that in a minute. In a minute, in Yiddish, we say a mamzer, bastard. We use that to designate like an asshole. But it is just interesting as an aside to note that there is mamzer, a bastard, technically in the Torah. There's no negative association with being mamzer. It's a technical term. It does not have to do with somebody who's born out of wedlock. A mamzer is the product of an illicit relationship. So a single woman who gives birth to a child in the Torah law is not a mamzer. That's not what a bastard is. A bastard is the product of an adulterous relationship, let's say.
So is it in those times that if you were a bastard, it wasn't a besmirch on your reputation?
Well, it was. It absolutely was. And the big challenge, Hillary, for a mamzer was that you couldn't marry an Israelite of standing. You could only marry another mamzer. And that carried over into the 10th generation. But again, just remembering that what's the definition of a mamzer. But now we use mamzer colloquially, like we would just use like a major assholic jerk.
Okay.
to be technical, that's
such a shame to punish the child.
Absolutely.
It has nothing to do with the circumstances of their birth. I could see punishing, I suppose, if you're going to be judgmental, the mother or the father, but why
That's how you
dish
punish.
the child for 10 generations when they had nothing to do with it?
I'm absolutely with you.
But that's how you punish the parents, is by punishing the child.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think
That's
so.
that's what makes them hurt, is that you hurt
I
the
don't think
child.
so. I think the child hurts a lot more than the parents. They're the ones
It's
that
true, but they don't think of that.
generations, yeah.
It's a, you know, it's the attempt to for social control. So there are 6 specific blessings that are mentioned in this portion, beginning in chapter 26, verse 6. So I just think it's interesting to look at what these blessings are, because they speak to basic human needs. And what we can see as we look at what are the blessings that are promised to us for our obedience, im b'chokotai, if we walk on this path. And those human needs are basically unchanged from the time of the Torah until now. So one is economic prosperity arising from one's own self-sufficient land and not depending on imports. One is security, freedom from fear. One is that there will be peace. One is that we will have the strength and valor to overcome our enemies. One is that there will be an increase in the population in numbers through a high birth rate and through people joining the community. And the last one is God's presence among the people. So if we look at the text and see, you know, what are the things that people care about most? Those are things that we all still care about. You know, we want to have economic security. We want to have peace. We want to have strength. We want to have numbers. We want to feel God's presence with us. It's why I think Torah study is so relevant even today, because even though our, you know, the technology has changed so radically, when you come down to basically what the people want and need, it really hasn't changed. So if you look in your book, you see chapter 26 is verses 3 to 13. It's on page 10 in your book that you have, are the blessings. Then we get to the curses. They pick up on page 10 and 12 and 14 and much of 16. So it's kind of also an interesting aspect of human psychology. Why are there so many more curses than blessings? So I'll let you think about and respond to that for a minute before I share some thoughts about that.
Because sometimes humans are much more motivated by the stick than the carrot.
I would say so. Is that your experience?
Generally, yes.
How does your study of law impact your perspective on that?
Oh, the study of law changes your perspective on everything, because you learn about what the reasonable person would do, and that's the standard for judging what people do in general. But for the most part, the laws are drafted to create sticks, not carrots. Laws are drafted to provide guidance and penalty if you don't follow the guidance, rather than the reward you'll get if you follow the guidance. You know, because the reward is that you have the social contract. So that's something that everybody benefits from. but usually the laws, especially, criminal, of course, but the other thing is that I guess the only way you could say that the law incentivizes good things is that when you follow like requests for proposals and you get the contract, then that's, something that happens that's good for you. But for the most part, generally laws are there to keep you in line rather than to incentivize you to be a good person.
So it's so well stated. And I think that's exactly what we see going on here. So, we have these various blessings that will come to us if we follow the law. And then these progressively bad to worse to horrible to unimaginable consequences if we continually disobey.
Well, but I would speak to the other side of that, which is there's no learning that happens from punishment. People who are punished are angry about being punished. They're not invited to learn better ways of being. I mean, it seems to me, when you approach behavior from the standpoint of here are the rewards and here are the benefits of better ways of doing things, then there can be remediation. But rarely do I find human beings to respond very well to punishment other than with anger. And I'm not sure it teaches lessons. I think it teaches punishment, just an opinion, not a legal opinion. Maybe the point is that people don't learn and don't remediate. So the only thing you can do is punish for infractions and not hope that people learn better ways of coping and dealing.
Well, this is one of the big questions about, the difference between retribution and rehabilitation. It's like, what is prison for? What is the criminal code there for? Is it
Right.
to create, incentive to go back into society? And here we're going to teach you things that you can do to go back into society and be a staying member? Or are we going to put you into solitary confinement for a couple of years where you're going to come out and you're going to be mentally damaged? It's a very big question. I agree with you 100%.
It's a
Well,
challenge.
there are cases where the punishment is clearly to make us as a society feel better. I was running this morning and I was listening to the NPR story about the woman that got put to death overnight. And, I actually felt kind of at peace, like there had been justice for this poor pregnant woman who had been murdered by this woman, until they started talking about all the nuances of her background, and she had serious mental illness. But that my initial thought was, yay, retribution for society, and so I think there's a part of that in this too. It's not just carrot and stick. It's to make those of us that are law abiding and that don't need a stick feel better when somebody does, that the punishment fits the crime.
There's a sense of justice.
Right.
That sense of justice is absent in a society in which it's not administered justly. It's not equal justice. So when you can buy your way out of a prison sentence or get a cushy, nice prison for a couple of months versus someone who's sent to prison for decades for a minor infraction, like it doesn't really feel like
Justice.
the carrot, that the punishment is equal to the crime.
Yeah, it's one of the issues about the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. It's like if in North Carolina, a Black person is more, likely to be sentenced to death for a particular type of crime, and then you go across the border to Kentucky, and it turns out that the same crime would not be dealt with in that same particular way. It's like, that's just arbitrary and capricious. And if Johnny's going to get one sentence and Jimmy's going to get another based on the color of their skin, then it isn't justice. I totally agree with you there. It's a big problem.
It's very complicated. The Torah says tzedek, tzedek, tirdo, justice, justice shall you pursue. And, of course, since we believe that there's no words that are wasted in the Torah, if the word justice is repeated, so then that begs the question, why is the word justice repeated? And one classic interpretation is that justice in the means and justice in the ends. You can't have unjust means to support a just end.
I think that this was written during a time period where humanity itself was not that well developed, though. And so punishments were much more clear and imminent than some vague promise of a future reward.
I think you're absolutely right, John. And if you think about the fact that to whom is this being addressed? To people who have just spent the last 400 years as slaves,
Right.
where they had no power and control, no opportunity to make decisions. All they knew was sticks.
Mhm.
So the Torah is speaking to them in a language that they can understand.
And to that end, I think that sometimes people are intimidated by or do not react as well to success or prosperity or positive things in their life because they're intimidated by them. So not everyone is comfortable with the rewards of life. A lot of people who've had like a troubled upbringing, it's more comfortable sometimes for them to struggle. So we tend to perpetuate the negative things that have happened to us in our life, generation to generation. So it makes sense that there's more of these negative things because that's really what gets passed down and is more real to people than the positives.
So that's how I've always understood, Chi, this idea of the sins of the parents are visited on the children, because going back to Peg's point, it seems terribly unfair for children to be punished for the sins of their parents. But if you think about it in just the way that you're describing, that one generation to the next, negative patterns of behavior are perpetuated. In that sense, yes, the sins of the parents are visited on the children. How do we break out of those patterns?
The pipeline to prison in this country is foster care, and it's generational. I volunteered on death row for 7 years, and I can tell you that in a women's prison, none of these people had any of the lives that we had. And so, how do you measure justice to people that were never treated just to begin with? And killing someone never solves any problem whatsoever, because again, it's easy for us on the outside to say, well, kill them, just kill them. But who does the killing? Now you have to think about, people don't just explode because you say kill them. Somebody has to actually kill them. So who's killing them now? It's the doctors and the nurses who've taken the Hippocratic Oath to heal. Now they're the ones that are being instruments of death. So that's just totally corrupt right there. I mean, it's just really.
So, one thing that's interesting as we read the Torah, you'll see that there are many, many, many instances of capital punishment. A stubborn and rebellious child should be put to death. Well, we would all be dead, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just goes without saying, you're stubborn and rebellious. And yet, as that gets unfolded into Talmudic law, the rabbis say, guess what? It never happened. That law was never enforced. So when we look at the Torah and we look at capital punishment, we have to understand that the Torah is trying to express a sense of values, what's important, what's not important. But as it gets formulated into actual action in a judicial sense, the Talmud says that a court that puts someone to death once every 7 years is a bloody court. And then the next opinion says once every 70 years it's a bloody court. So what the rabbis do is they look at the Torah text and all of these situations where the Torah mandates capital punishment, and then they set up what are the parameters by which we could say that convict a person of that capital crime, and they make the standards such that they become impossible. So they can have their cake and eat it too. We can have on the books that, you know, you should respect and honor your parents and you should listen to them. And if you don't, you should be put to death. But the reality is that the standard is such that it could never happen. So for example, murder, the murder is a capital offense. It's one of the few things that's mentioned in all 5 books of the Torah. Every book of the Torah has at least one place where it says, you kill someone, you get killed, that's it. So as that comes into the Talmud, okay, how do we convict someone of a capital offense? Well, there have to be 2 witnesses to the crime who actually see the crime being committed. They have to warn the person who's about to commit the murder in the moment. Do you know that what you are about to do is a capital offense? And if you carry through with what you are about to do, that you will yourself be executed. And that person has to, in the moment, have the consciousness to say, you know, yes, I understand, and I'm going to go ahead and do what I'm going to do anyway. And, you know, clearly it becomes an impossible standard. So that's, the rabbis sort of legislate capital punishment out of existence because of their discomfort with it, and yet keep it on the books to say, you know, these are the values that we uphold. These are the standards that we should live by. So a lot more curses than blessings, as we see 1 page of blessings, 4 pages of curses. You can take a look. I'll point out a few of the premier curses that just jump off the page to me. I also think about it in the sense of there are 613 mitzvot, right? Of those mitzvot, there are 248 positive commandments, thou shalt, and there are 365 negative commandments, thou shalt not. So I think that's part of the same understanding of human psychology, that it's a lot easier to tell people not to do something than it is to tell them proactively to do it. So I think all of this has to be understood through that lens of how the text is understanding human psychology. So if you don't obey me, on the bottom of page 10, what's going to happen? You'll sow your seed to no purpose. You'll plant. Not only won't you have food to eat, but your enemies will eat it. Food security, basic human concern. I love that quote that says, no food, one problem, enough food, many problems. No food, one problem. And until you have, if you don't know where your next meal is coming from, that's the entire focus of your life. Mm-hmm. You'll flee though none pursues. You know, what a horrible feeling that you feel so unsettled that you can't relax and feel comfortable and confident in your own space. Even if there's no one chasing you, you still won't be comfortable. And then,
can I just ask you a question, Rabbi? Is
sure.
Means, or does it mean that you'll leave because you feel so ashamed and nobody will care enough about you to come after?
Oh my God, that's so beautiful and heartbreaking. Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful midrash on the text for sure.
To me, that's how I hear that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but I'll just share personally. My husband, David, may he rest in peace. moved out of his parents' home at the age of 14 and became self-supporting. And, we were married for 29 years, together for a few years, more than that. And only one time in all the time I knew him, 30 plus years, he always talked about that kind of a little bit with a sense of pride that, he was able to sustain himself and support himself from such a young age. And one time he said, and no one came after me. And, when you say that, God, it just brings me right back to that moment that, yeah, his parents let him move out at age 14 and no one came after him.
That is heartbreaking.
Yeah. Wow. I hadn't thought about that in a while.
Mm.
10 women will bake their bread in one oven. There just will be so little food that, you won't need a lot of, in this era, there were communal ovens. So not everybody had their own oven, of course. So, you won't need ovens because there won't be food to eat. And then at the bottom of the page, you will eat and not be satisfied. How much does that resonate? What a terrible thing that is. And, I think it's a plague that many of us suffer from also, that we just eat unconsciously and we don't stop because we don't feel satisfied. It's something that I think we can relate to.
Especially in COVID world.
Yeah.
If I might share, my grandmother, who was a Holocaust survivor, may she rest in peace, told stories about living as a young woman in World War I, and her parents got her out of Berlin and sent her to South Germany. And where she was, they didn't have enough wheat to make bread. And so they ground up the furniture and added sawdust. And she said, it would fill us, but it wouldn't satisfy us. And that's what that makes me think of, is being in such a time of privation that you would have food to eat, but it wouldn't be nutritious. It wouldn't satisfy.
Wow. That's an amazing legacy.
And it's probably true that back when these were written, that there were probably lots of fillers that they were adding to keep everybody filled but not satiated.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets worse from there. So moving on to page 14, if you continue to not obey, you'll eat the flesh of your sons and the flesh of your daughters. You'll be so desperate for food that you'll resort to cannibalism. And then the parallel of this text is when you look in the book of Lamentations, which describes the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 by the Babylonians. The text in Lamentations, which probably is around the time that what we're reading was actually committed to writing, Lamentations says that there was cannibalism, that people were so desperate that they were eating the flesh of their children.
Well, in corollary to that, it doesn't say you will kill your children and eat them. It's that their children die of starvation, and then they're forced to eat them for their own.
Right. Which, we know that does happen. What was that Alpine?
Oh yeah, when they were alive, when the soccer team crashed in the Alps.
Right.
Or the Donner Party.
Right.
Yeah.
It was South America. It was the Andes, not the Alps.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah. And then if you look at the bottom of page 14, the sound of a driven leaf shall put them to flight. So again, that, I'm living in a constant state of fear. And I can't recommend highly enough. Milton Steinberg wrote a book called As a Driven Leaf, and he took the title of the book from this reference, right here. And it's a novel that's set in the Talmudic period. And you can really get a lot of insight about the early millennium Jewish experience from that novel as a driven lead.
Milton Steinberg.
Milton Steinberg.
Okay.
That concept of a man without a country.
Right. So moving on. So that's chapter 26. Our Torah portion is going to end with chapter 27, the last chapter in the book of Leviticus. So we're shifting focus a little bit here. I do want to spend some time on the next topic in chapter 27, which is talking about vows that we might make to the temple in terms of the valuation of male and female. So we're looking at gender and age in terms of value. What's the value of a young man? What's the value of a young woman? What's the value of an older man or woman? And I know I sent you some references, so I wanted to look first at what we see in, this is the Women's Torah commentary. If you're not familiar with this, is a reading of the entire Torah through the lens of women's experience. And I know I shared with you on page 780, the Women's Torah commentary perspective on this. So it talks about the four different categories and understanding them as related to the labor potential within each group. So that's, who has the greatest earning potential, and that, so if I say I want to commit, I'm making a charitable pledge of the amount of an adult male, an adult female, a young female, that it provides a perspective into the labor patterns in the household and the status of women. So I'll just read you a little bit about this. I'm on page 780 in that document. The best way to view the table is to sum the value of the two genders in each age bracket, thus obtaining the combined labor value of a female-male pair of workers in each category. Then we can compare the contribution of each gender to this total. Except for the 5 to 20 category, in which childbearing, presumably beginning at puberty, might reduce the labor potential of females, the female percentage of that combined female-male amount is at or near 40%. Social scientists who study the relative contributions of women and men to a household labor in various cultures have noted that a 2 to 3 female to male ratio, with women supplying 40% of the subsistence labor, correlates with the maximum prestige for women. Thus, the table of valuations in Leviticus 27 is hardly a reflection of female inferiority, but rather provides evidence of a positive estimation of women. So saying that women of childbearing and working age do bring some positive value to the household. And when we look at the whole category of male and female, my Sunday morning Torah study group, we're studying the early chapters of Genesis and the creation narratives. And we see that in Genesis chapter 1, the human being who was created initially in Genesis chapter 1 is a hermaphroditic figure. Male and female, God created them, one being created simultaneously. And even the Jewish Midrash interprets this as one being with both male and female characteristics, who then is split into a male and a female gender. And I gave you also from, this is a wonderful, relatively new book. We See It So Differently by Leonard Felder. And he had just a couple of pages. So the concept of this book is, it says creative ways for Jews to make peace when family members or colleagues disagree about religion, politics, and other issues. So very, very timely. And he has an analysis beginning on page 94, which you also should have in your handouts, of, you know, the rabbis were not stupid. They recognized that gender is a fluid concept, and that there's a term in biblical, I don't know if it's just the Bible, maybe Liana and John, you can tell us, is merism a term that occurs in general literature study? Is that something that's come up in the idea of a merism? So like when you say heaven and earth, the idea is it means heaven and earth and everything between. When you say good and bad, and it means everything in between. So the argument or the suggestion is that when the Torah tells us male and female, that we might understand that as male and female as a continuum and everything in between. So, this is, I hope you have access to that document. It says, one final Jewish method, finding the joy of radical amazement for the diversity of creation. So, does anybody have that text there? It's pages 94 and 95 of this book.
I didn't see the handouts.
Yeah, I sent them a bit of a while ago. I'll resend them again after class. So I'll just read this to you because I think it's important for us to know when we're looking at this chapter and looking at the value of male and the value of female, to understand that the rabbis understand that there's a continuum here. For example, most people don't realize that in the Torah, the Talmud, and Mishnah commentaries, there are at least 6 variations of gender described as part of God's creation, including 149 references in Mishnah and Talmud to the androgynous person who has both male and female characteristics. 181 references in Mishnah and Talmud to the tumtum person who has indeterminate or obscured sexual characteristics. Rachel, as a nurse, you can probably speak to that. That's, it's a documented phenomenon that it's not always 100% clear. And, even 2,000 years ago, the rabbis recognized that, and they had a gender category for what they called a tumtum. We're just not sure. 80 references in Mishnah and Talmud to the Ilonit person who is identified as female at birth, but develops quote unquote male characteristics at puberty. And 156 references in Mishnah and Talmud to the Saris person who is identified as male at birth, but develops female characteristics later on. So
That's fascinating.
yes, I think so.
Fascinating.
Well, and I think it shows that even then there was acknowledgement that assigned gender was mutable. Precisely.
Perfect summary. Assigned gender is mutable. I love that. Another issue that comes up in the highlights of the Parsha talks about free will and punishment. So I wanted just to encourage you to look at that. It's a big challenge about reward and punishment. And if we turn to page 26 and look at the quote in the text box, I think you all have this in front of you. Yes, so do you see where it says causes of human suffering? Rabbi Roland B. Gittleson of Boston.
Yep.
Can somebody read us just Rabbi Gittelson's teaching there?
Rabbi Roland B. Gittleson of Boston, 1910 to 1995, does not believe in a God who sits in heaven and rewards those who live in accordance with the commandments of Torah and punishes those who do not. Instead, Rabbi Gittleson holds that there are 4 sources of suffering. 1, defiance of nature's physical laws. 2, ignorance of these physical laws. 3, defiance of nature's spiritual laws. And 4, ignorance of these spiritual laws.
So it is a great challenge for religious people to answer the question of what we call theodicy, or why do good people suffer? And we know Rabbi Harold Kushner wrote that famous book about when bad things happen to good people. Susan, I see you shaking your head. You're familiar with that book. So Susan, maybe you would read for us there at the top of page 26. This commentary kind of summarizes his teaching.
Okay, so starting with Rabbi Harold S. Kushner, Massachusetts.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. In his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, argues that one reason for the suffering of innocent good people is that our being human leaves us free to hurt each other, and God can't stop us without taking away the freedom that makes us human. In other words, human pain is not the result of God rewarding or punishing, but it is the result of human beings harming one another. Kushner puts the matter this way: human beings can cheat each other, rob each other, hurt each other, and God can only look down in pity and compassion at how little we have learned over the ages about how human beings should behave. When people ask, where was God in Auschwitz? How could he have permitted the Nazis to kill so many innocent men, women, and children? My response is that it was not God who caused it. It was caused by human beings choosing to be cruel to their fellow men.
Thanks. Read one more paragraph.
Okay. But what about the sickness of innocent people, the suffering of those afflicted with disease, crippled by illness? Are these God's punishments for not observing the Torah's commandments? Kushner, whose son Aaron died in his teens of a rare disease, writes, I don't believe that God causes mental retardation in children or chooses who should suffer from muscular dystrophy. The God I believe in does not send us the problem, but rather gives us the strength to cope with the problem.
There you go. So that's an essential summary of Kushner's analysis of the problem. The chapter that we're reading in Leviticus suggests this very straight line between behavior and reward and punishment. And it's a challenge for us. So that's this whole section in our commentary is trying to find ways that we can understand that will resonate with us, because it's very clear in the world, as I said, that we don't experience that direct association. And by the way, if there was an immediate direct correlation between behavior and reward and punishment, one would imagine that everybody would buck up and do the right thing, because we would all want to receive the immediate sense of the reward. And we would lose the essence of what it is to be a human being, because to be a human being is to have the ability to make choices. And that's the other thing we're looking at Sunday morning as we're looking at those early chapters of Genesis, which I think are also trying to help us reflect on and understand this concept that we eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then for better or worse, we get kicked out of paradise. And now we have to live in the world. And now we all have to live with the consequences of the choices that other people make through the exercise of their free will. And that most of the evil in the world can be attributed to either just the physical nature of, if we're in the wrong place at the wrong time when there's an avalanche and we get crushed, that is not God singling us out and saying that we're being punished because, we didn't light Shabbos candles or we ate a ham sandwich. Most of us don't have that kind of a theology. We accept the fact that because we live in a physical material world, there are consequences that come from that it is not helpful to understand as God's punishment. There are people who have a theology of what we call hashgacha prati, of individual providence, that if I'm in a hurry to get somewhere and all the lights turn green as I'm driving, oh, that was God watching out for me to make sure that I could get there in time. But personally, I find that kind of theology very problematic. You often see this when there's a natural disaster and you see the person standing outside their home after the hurricane and they're all happy that their home was spared and they feel like God was watching out for them. And, it just begs the question about, well, what about their neighbor? Does God hate them and that's why their house got destroyed? So there's some portion of negativity that comes into our lives because we are living in this physical embodied existence. But the majority of the evil that comes to us comes from human choice and the fact that people have the choice to do right or wrong. And people make poor choices and we all have to live with the consequences of that. We're going to be out of time in a minute. I want to encourage you to finish reading that because it does move on to what I find to be a very unsatisfying suggestion of Rabbi Robert Fortas, who proposes that we have such a narrow perspective that what we perceive as evil or bad or wrong may be part of some ultimate divine plan that we are not aware of. And that if we could just step back far enough to see the whole big picture, then we would understand why God allows evil to occur. We can spend a minute, if you take some time to look at that, we can spend a minute when we get back together again and talk about it. For me, that's pretty unsatisfying and in fact, angering because, I just can't imagine a God who would have a plan where Harold Kushner's child suffers from progeria and died. And there's, Kushner himself in that book, Susan, I don't know if you remember, he says, did it make me a better, more sensitive, compassionate, kind, caring rabbi that this occurred in my family? Yes. Would I rather have been a mediocre rabbi my entire life and had my child not suffer from this illness? Yes. So to say that there's great good that comes out of this suffering, I don't know, that doesn't work for me. But
I think, and Rabbi, it's one of the more compelling talks you ever gave, where you talk about finding the gratitude in all things, the honey and the sting. And I do think that, for me anyway, I draw great solace from the fact that when bad things happen, finding a way back to gratitude for what I do have is often a way of healing. And I think, also having lost my stepdaughter, would I rather that not happen? Certainly. But have I seen the blessings that have come into my world and into our world as a result of that journey? 100%. And so I do think that there's something innately positive in Jewish thought that to find that which heals us in the hardest stuff that we go through.
Yeah, it's beautiful that you get to that place, Rachel. And I would just say that from a human perspective, that is always something that I would wait for the person who is in that situation to express, and not something that should be imposed by anyone else.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do have a non sequitur question before we end, which is when we will be getting our trope recordings,
Oh,
portions.
let me, I think the Cantor plan to do that after the first of the year, which it is now. So I will let him know that we met and that question came up, and let's get right on that.
I'm just worried that I will start memorizing in one way and then have to rememorize in a different without that as a
Okay, yeah, thanks for the reminder.
crutch.
I definitely appreciate that. It's wonderful to see everyone. Take good care, stay safe. I hope you get a vaccination soon, and we can all meet in person. It's still up in the air what's going to be for our service, how much in person, how much virtual. We don't know the answer to that yet, but
We will be flexible,
yeah, that's my specialty.
whatever works.
So when we get vaccinated, should we let you know so that you as the clergy have an understanding of which of us have gotten our vaccines?
Yeah, we'll definitely be in this process together.
Okay.
Yeah, good. All right, everybody, take
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Night.
Bye.
Bye.